I'm Garrett Sussman, and this is SEO in 2025.
Garrett, what's your number one SEO tip for 2025?
My number one SEO tip for 2025 is this whole idea of the role of cognitive biases in SEO. You see, our brains play a lot of tricks on ourselves, and when people are searching for things, we actually can be deceived by our own shortcuts that our brain plays, which are these cognitive biases that ultimately influence the type of information that we're seeking. And SEOs need to pay attention to it. You see, we all bring context into our searches, how our day's going, our jobs, what we like, our families, and that influences the type of information that we're looking for. So there are various cognitive biases, over hundreds of them, and they influence the way that we search, the queries that we put in, the results that we see from Google, and the results that we ultimately choose. So a couple of examples that I typically think about when it comes to search content strategy: confirmation bias. Turns out that we're actually, when we're searching, a lot of times trying to find information that confirms our existing belief. It may not be the right information, but it's information that actually we want to know. We don't want to have our minds changed. So we actually search that way, and your audience does too. A second is familiarity bias. For instance, we are much more comfortable with what we are familiar with, and that plays a large role in brand recognition. We know that brand holistically can influence what we search for. We're more likely to click on a result from a brand that we recognize. And the same goes for the third one, which is authority bias, that we believe authorities, experts in the field. If you see, an educational site, you might trust it more because it's academic, or a health hospital site. All of these different types of biases can influence the way that we search. And as SEOs, what we can actually do is have our content and SEO strategy influenced by what our audiences are searching for.
Great. Okay. Wonderful explanation there. We'll go into maybe each of those areas in slightly greater depth. But in the meantime, I did a quick Google search just to confirm what cognitive means for me and for the listener. And cognitive means relating to the mental process involving in knowing, learning, and understanding things. So the mental process, so the bias of that mental process. So you may have a process of learning things, and there's some bias, there's something that's stopping you from learning the absolute truth. Is that a reasonable summary as to what a cognitive bias actually is?
Yeah, it's really the way that we think, right? The way that we logically come to conclusions, the way that we search for information. It's using our brain and all these heuristics, these little shortcut tricks that we use to make everything easier. Because the truth is, it takes a lot of brain power to think, and we as humans are kind of lazy. And so that's why we use those shortcuts. Think about it. Daniel Kahneman actually wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, in which he had this idea around two systems. There's one system, intuitive, emotion-based thinking, and then system number two, which is much more complex. If you're driving down the road and you're having a conversation with a friend, you can do all these things at once. But then all of a sudden, if a car comes in the way and you have to swerve, all of a sudden you're not going to be talking to your friend anymore. That's where your second system, the more complex system, comes into play. For the most part, we depend on the system one thinking. And so cognitive biases is when those little shortcuts go wrong.
I love looking up the thesaurus or dictionary when you're talking. So heuristics, mental shortcuts for solving problems in a quick way that delivers a result that's sufficient enough to be given useful time in the useful time constraints. So mental shortcuts for solving problems, they're heuristics. And I'm sure many people are aware of that. And I think I was, but it's nice just to confirm things like that, just to get the concept completely straight in my head. Going back to the different biases that you talked about there, maybe focusing in on confirmation bias initially. You also mentioned that Google deliver results that support these bias searches. So what do you mean by that?
Well, perfect example is when you're looking for information about health benefits of coffee. There's been a lot of studies done about this. There's a famous one from 2015 by Kamen. And basically, imagine if I'm asking, is coffee healthy for you? And I get a set of results. Now, what if I flip that around and I came from, because I wanted to prove, that coffee was healthy for me. What if I came the other direction of trying to prove that coffee is unhealthy for me? And I put that into Google, I'd actually get a different set of search results. There are studies that prove, aspects of coffee that are and aspects that are unhealthy. So based on the biased nature of the search, trying to prove whether it's healthy for me versus unhealthy for me is actually going to produce completely different search results. There might be some overlap, but you can start to see there how the way that I search and the angle that I come from will influence that cognitive bias, that confirmation bias of what I'm looking to prove will actually be influenced by the way that I phrase it.
I actually had a conversation about confirmation biases earlier on today. We were talking about Google as well. And the question I asked, not in relation to necessarily being a success with SEO, is just simply what Google was doing. And I said to her, well, is Google doing the wrong thing here? Should they actually bring up alternate results if they know that perhaps the articles that they're displaying are opinion-based and not definitive in terms of right or wrong? Should they actually also be offering alternate viewpoints on the same search? What's your point of view on that?
I think it's a great question. And I think the heart of it kind of asks whether or not Google is editorial in nature by its results, which in a lot of respects it is. To your point, a fact and opinion are vastly different. I remember I was having this conversation last year with Jack Chambers Ward on the Candor podcast, and we were talking about this idea when Google's rolling out perspectives, right? And they were having this perspectives tab. And you start to wonder, like, how do you decide what perspective is the most valuable? When are you showing two sides of the same coin for like a conspiracy theory, for instance? And I think it becomes a really complex topic of Google deciding what opinion is the most valid, is the most valuable. Like, I don't have an answer for you, because it's like, how do you do that? How do you choose that one perspective is more important and valuable in another? Because whenever you're ranking opinions, that's in essence what you're doing with search results, right?
I understand that to a certain degree, but you could certainly argue that they're not being neutral by keeping people in their bubbles and not exposing people to alternate points of view. And I think there's probably a greater opportunity in something, for example, like People Also Ask within Google search results, because People Also Ask seems to keep people in the same train of thought as opposed to giving them the opportunity to explore new ideas.
I think regardless is problematic. I guess that's my point, is whatever Google chooses to do is editorial. Because even People Also Ask is going to be biased. Like, if I put in a brand name, you're going to see a bunch of different other questions that come up based on what other people are searching for. The example I look for is Nike, right? Like, you might see People Also Ask questions about whether Nike is, produces great shoes and it's great for athletes, but you might also see a People Also Ask about whether they still make clothes in sweatshops in Asia, right? And there's a certain type of like bias there. It can be for brands bias in both different directions. Whether or not they decide to show that in the results is either, benefits the brand, is problematic. What responsibility do they have to surface these types of other perspectives? I don't think that anyone has a right answer for that.
And you mentioned Nike there as well, and that probably leads to the second bias that you mentioned, familiarity bias. So if someone types in Nike or even training shoes and actually sees the Nike website, they're more likely to click on that than a brand that they don't recognize. Is that what you're referring to when you talk about familiarity bias?
Yeah, and it plays across a bunch of different types of industries as well. Think about it in the media. Like, you have your go-to news source. So if you're looking for a news topic in search and you see the same types of headlines, but you see all these different news sources, you're more likely to click on the news source that you're familiar with, right? Maybe you're looking for, going back to our bias perspective takes, you're more likely to click on the brand that's going to have a opinion or perspective that aligns with what your political leanings are, for instance. So I think the familiarity bias plays a big role in terms of how often you see these different brands, whether it's because they advertise more or you choose to engage with those brands in your everyday life.
But it's certainly something to be aware of from an SEO perspective, because if you can get a higher click-through rate for your brand for generic terms because people recognize your brand, then wonderful.
Yeah. And it's also relevant with AI overviews, just in terms of visibility. People are saying, okay, should I actually try to appear in AI overviews just for the impression, even if people aren't clicking on the links? And that's an aspect of brand familiarity that would benefit you. Like, even if people aren't clicking on you, just to see your name in that AI overview generative output, then that's a value add for your brand, even if it's not delivering the actual traffic, which is the big point of SEO.
And authority bias, we trust people and organizations that we consider to be experts. So how do we position our brands to be authorities within our niche?
Well, I think there are a few ways to do that, whether it's through EAT and using actual experts with credentials in your author pages. And I'm not just talking about how that will improve your rankings, but showing that experts are writing the content on your site. The other way is through links, getting authoritative links from other kind of complementary organizations within your industry that are linking to you can show you as an authority. Social proof is a big thing, whether you're having like well-known, recognized brands that use your product or service or associate with you, or that you're showing up in well-known media publications in your industry. All of those are different factors that can make you look more authoritative and benefit your brand ultimately from an SEO perspective as well.
And you also say that SEOs can leverage their audience's biases to produce a content strategy that aligns with their needs. So how do you go about establishing what the likely cognitive biases of your audience are? And how do you take advantage of that and give your brand a better opportunity?
Yeah, so a lot of ways that you can do that. I think the core thing is really understand your audience by interviewing them, whether it's your existing customers or the general market. And you can do this through different surveys, different one-to-one interviews, asking them pointed questions about A, your product, B, their general affinities, like what their interests are, asking more about them, asking their opinions on different topics that are related, and then incorporating those opinions into your content. One example I saw recently was around electric vehicles. There's a lot of strong opinions about like whether they're safe or not. And I was surprised that in a search result of are electric vehicles safe, out of all of the different results, a lot of them were government studies and different media publications. And then I saw one page from Kia, like an actual manufacturer. I'm like, oh, well, wouldn't you think that brand is more likely to have people purchase their electric vehicle because they're the only one that's showing up for a key confirmation bias type of question that their audience might be asking.
So if you're a brand that operates in the niche, then go ahead and do that, then I guess is what you're saying. And if people are having a real conundrum with regards to whether or not your product or service is right and suitable for them in the future, then answer those types of challenging questions. So what is your favorite way to establish the most important questions to be answering in that situation?
Well, that's really tough. I think it depends, obviously, on your brand and where you're focusing on in the buyer's journey. You probably would want to start at the bottom of the funnel, whatever is closest to revenue, and understand, for instance, what are they biased to and why they're making a decision between your brand and a competitor, and build out that content and address those objections or those interests or those biases there, and then maybe work your way outwards, because ultimately marketing is all about getting them to become customers. So depending on how many resources you have, I start with what's going to make money and then work outwards.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time thinking about cognitive biases in 2025?
Oh man, my big thing would be stop wasting your time trying to do link building for low quality links that have nothing to do with your site, your industry, the value that your company brings. I think there's still some really outdated thoughts around quantity of links. And I think in 2025, 5, that's a waste of time.
Okay. So it doesn't matter if you don't build a link in a month, as long as if you're publishing great content and you've got a few great links historically pointing to your domain name. Would that be a reasonable summary?
No, don't get me wrong. I think link building is still important. I still think it's valuable to have it be an ongoing process where you're getting valuable quality links from your industry. I just wouldn't do it at scale for just any type of link that doesn't drive the actual value, that isn't actually authoritatively relevant to your content. I wouldn't waste on that type of link building.
So links that don't have the potential to drive traffic.
Yeah, and that don't drive, relevant value to, by being related to your industry. I think just getting a link willy-nilly anywhere doesn't have the same value as a high authority link that's, relevant to your topic of authority.
Garrett Sussman is marketing lead at iPullRank, and you can find him over at iPullRank.com. Garrett, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2025.
Thanks, Dave.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2025, the book, over at SEOin2025.com.